Have you ever opened your door to find death standing on the other side? Not literal death, but the kind of visitor who changes everything, who brings news so terrible that your entire world shifts in an instant? That's what happened to me on a freezing May morning. And what that stranger told me, what he demanded from me, forced me to make a choice that still haunts me to this day. I'm Robert Chen, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the monsters aren't the ones knocking on your door. Sometimes they're the ones already living inside your village. Let me set the scene for you. It's May 1848, 8 months after I ran my beggar experiment, 8 months after I discovered my village was full of selfish, cruel people who'd let strangers starve while stealing from merchants in broad daylight. And I was right to be worried, because the winter that came was the worst anyone could remember. It started in November. The harvest had been poor, we all knew that. But then the first frost came early in December, killed off the late root vegetables people were counting on. Then in January, the grain stores in Lord Harrington's estate got contaminated with mold, had to burn half of it. By February, food prices had tripled. A loaf of bread that used to cost 2 pennies now cost 6. Families who were barely getting by suddenly couldn't afford to eat. By March and April, people were starving. Not everyone, mind you. The wealthy were fine. Lord Harrington and his family, the merchants, the landowners, they had plenty. They'd stored enough food to last years. But the poor? The laborers, the tenant farmers, the craftsmen who lived week to week? They were dying. I'd see them in the village square. Thin faces, hollow eyes, children with distended bellies from malnutrition, people begging for scraps, fighting over food waste in the gutters. And you know what the wealthy did? Nothing. They locked their doors in their storehouses and pretended not to see. Remember Thomas Miller, the baker who'd slammed his door in my face when I was dressed as a beggar? He was still selling bread, but at such high prices that only the rich could afford it. People would stand outside his shop, watching through the windows as he pulled fresh loaves from the oven, and he'd just pull the curtains closed. Margaret Evans, the seamstress, who'd threatened to call her son when I'd asked for help, she was hoarding grain in her basement. Someone saw her bringing in sacks late at night. Enough grain to feed 10 families through winter, just sitting there while her neighbors starved. Peter Cross, the butcher? He was selling meat at 10 times the normal price, and the meat was questionable quality, probably from animals that died of disease. But people were so desperate they bought it anyway. The village I'd tested in September had failed spectacularly, just like I'd predicted. When the crisis came, everyone looked out for themselves. Sarah and I were okay. We'd prepared like Grandsister had advised. We'd stored food, saved money, made plans. We had enough to survive winter, though not comfortably. Gran herself was struggling. Her cough had gotten worse through the cold months, and even with our preparations, the lack of fresh food and the bitter cold had weakened her. She spent most days by the fire now, wrapped in blankets, but her mind was still sharp as ever, and we were helping where we could. Margaret Patterson and her husband Thomas, Eleanor Brooks, Ann Harris, the widow, old Mr. Fletcher, we'd formed our own little group, sharing resources, helping each other, taking care of the few decent people in this cesspit of a village. But we couldn't help everyone. There were too many hungry people and not enough food. It was May 12th when the stranger knocked on my door. I was at my forge, trying to keep warm while working on horseshoes for Lord Harrington's stable. The fire in the forge was one of the few warm places in the village, and I'd been letting some of the children come stand near it during the day. Their parents couldn't afford firewood, so the kids would have frozen otherwise. There were maybe 8 children huddled near the forge that morning when I heard the knock. Not at the forge entrance, at my house door, attached to the side of the workshop. I looked up, confused. Sarah and Gran were inside. One of them should have answered, but the knocking continued, loud and insistent. I put down my hammer and walked to the door, wiping soot from my hands. When I opened it, my heart stopped. The man standing there was tall, maybe 40 years old, with a hard face that had seen violence. He wore a heavy woolen cloak, good quality, expensive. But what made my blood run cold was what I saw when the wind caught his cloak and moved it aside. A seal, hanging from his belt, silver and red, with the royal crest, the king's seal. This man was a king's agent, someone sent directly from the capital with the authority to command, to judge, to execute if necessary. We didn't see King's agents in villages like ours. They dealt with big matters, important matters, wars and treason and major crimes. What was one doing here? Robert Chen? His voice was rough, like he'd spent years shouting orders. Yes, sir. I need to speak with you, privately. I glanced back at the children near the forge. My workshop, inside your house, now. It wasn't a request. I let him inside. Sarah was in the kitchen, and her face went white when she saw the seal on his belt. Gran was in her chair by the fire, and her eyes narrowed as she studied the stranger. Leave us, the agent told them. This is my wife and my grandmother, I said. Anything you need to tell me they can hear. He studied me for a moment, then glanced at Gran. Something in her steady gaze made him nod. Very well, sit down, all of you. Sarah and I sat at our kitchen table. Gran stayed in her chair. The agent remained standing, looming over us. My name is Captain Brennan. I'm here on direct orders from the capital. We've received reports about your village, about the famine, about people dying, about the wealthy hoarding food while the poor starve. I exchanged a glance with Sarah. That's all true, sir. It's been terrible. I'm not here about that, Brennan said coldly. Famines happen. People die. That's not the king's concern. My stomach sank. If he wasn't here to help with the famine, then why was he here? I'm here, Brennan continued, because someone from this village has been writing letters to the capital, letters detailing the situation here, letters requesting royal intervention, letters that are frankly treasonous. Treasonous? What? I don't understand, I said. How is asking for help treason? Because these letters don't just ask for help. They accuse Lord Harrington of deliberately causing the famine. They claim he's poisoned grain stores to drive up prices. They claim he's profiting from people's suffering. They claim the local priest is in on it. These are serious accusations against nobility and clergy. Oh no, oh God, no. Margaret. It had to be Margaret Patterson. She'd told me months ago about writing letters. She'd trusted me with that information. Gran coughed from her chair. Sounds like someone's trying to save lives while others profit from death. Where I come from, we call that courage, not treason. Brennan's eyes flicked to her, irritation crossing his face. Old woman, you'd do well to— I'm 83 years old, Gran interrupted. I've outlived 3 kings and more fools than I can count. You don't frighten me, boy. Despite everything, I felt a surge of pride in my grandmother. Brennan turned back to me, pulling papers from inside his cloak. These letters are signed with your name, Robert Chen. My world tilted. What? No, I didn't write those. Are you saying this isn't your signature? He laid the letters on the table, 3 of them, written in neat handwriting I recognized as Margaret's, and at the bottom of each one, a signature that looked exactly like mine. She'd forged my signature. Margaret had written letters accusing Lord Harrington and Father Benedict of crimes, and she'd signed my name to them. Now I understood why she'd told me about the letters months ago. She'd been preparing me, trusting me, giving me the choice to either protect her or deny involvement. I didn't write these, I said, my voice shaking. Someone forged my signature. Do you know who? I hesitated. If I told him about Margaret, she'd be arrested, probably executed. Forging someone's signature on treasonous letters was a hanging offense. But if I didn't tell him, if he thought I'd written them, I'd be the one hanging. And Sarah would be alone. Gran would have no one to care for her. Sarah grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing tight. Mr. Chen, Brennan said, his voice dangerous. I asked you a question. I need to understand something first, I said carefully. Are the accusations in those letters true? Is Lord Harrington causing this famine on purpose? Brennan's expression didn't change. That's not your concern. It is if you're asking me to help you find whoever wrote them. I need to know if they're a criminal or a hero. There's no difference, Brennan said. Accusations against nobility without proof are treason regardless of whether they're true. The social order must be maintained. And there it was. The truth laid bare. It didn't matter if Lord Harrington was deliberately starving people for profit. It didn't matter if the priest was helping him. All that mattered was maintaining the power structure. Gran spoke up again. So you're here to protect a lord who's killing his own people? That's what the king's justice looks like? Silence, old woman. Make me, boy. I'm dying anyway. This cough will take me before summer. What can you threaten me with? Brennan's jaw tightened, but he kept his focus on me. Mr. Chen, I need an answer. I won't help you, I said quietly. Sarah's hand tightened on mine, terrified. Brennan leaned forward, his hands on the table. You do understand what you're saying? If you won't help identify who wrote these letters, then I have to assume you wrote them yourself, which means you'll be arrested for treason. Then arrest me. Robert, Sarah started. No, I cut her off. I won't help him hunt down someone who's trying to save lives, even if it means hanging. Gran made a sound that might have been approval. Brennan stared at me for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Not a nice smile. A predator's smile. You're protecting someone, he said. Someone you care about, which means they're in this village, which means I'll find them anyway. He straightened up. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to investigate this village. I'm going to question people, and I'm going to find out who wrote these letters. When I do, they'll hang. And if I find out you helped them in any way, you'll hang beside them. Do what you have to do, I said. Oh, I will. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. The king is sending grain to this region. Relief supplies for the famine. They should arrive in about 3 weeks. Relief. Finally, help was coming. But, Brennan continued, if I determine that the letter's accusations are false, if I decide that Lord Harrington has done nothing wrong, then this village will be last on the distribution list, which means you'll wait months for supplies, which means a lot more people will die. He let that sink in. So you see, Mr. Chen, you're not just protecting one person by staying silent. You're condemning your entire village. Think about that. He left, his cloak swirling behind him. Sarah, Gran, and I sat in silence for a long moment. That man, Gran said finally, is exactly the kind of person who makes me glad I'm dying soon. Won't have to see what this world becomes with more like him in charge. Gran, don't say that. It's true, boy. My time's coming, but yours isn't, and neither is Sarah's. She looked at me hard. You did right. That Margaret woman, she's worth protecting, unlike most of the vultures in this village. You have to warn her, Sarah said. I know. I ran to Margaret's farm as fast as I could. She was in her kitchen, and from the look on her face when I burst in, she already knew something was wrong. Robert, what happened? A king's agent is here, Captain Brennan. He has your letters, Margaret, the ones you wrote about Lord Harrington, the ones you signed with my name. All the color drained from her face. Oh God, Robert, I'm so sorry. I didn't think they'd trace them back here. I thought using your name would protect me, and I thought you could just deny writing them since we'd talked about it. I never meant... They're threatening to execute whoever wrote them for treason. She sat down heavily. Then I'll turn myself in. I'll tell them I forged your signature. You won't get in trouble. If you turn yourself in, you'll hang. Then I'll hang. I won't let you take the blame for something I did. Thomas Patterson came in from outside, saw both our faces. What's going on? We told him everything. When we finished, he was quiet for a moment. Were the accusations true? He asked Margaret. Did Lord Harrington deliberately poison the grain stores? I don't know for certain, Margaret admitted, but I know he's profiting from this famine. I know he's selling grain at inflated prices while people starve. I know Father Benedict is getting paid to keep people from complaining. I don't have proof of poisoning, but something isn't right. The mold appeared too suddenly, too uniformly. Natural contamination doesn't work like that. Then we need to find proof, Thomas said. Are you insane? I asked. A king's agent is here. This isn't the time to go investigating Lord Harrington. It's exactly the time, Thomas said firmly. Because if we can prove the accusations are true, then Margaret wasn't committing treason. She was reporting real crimes. That changes everything. He had a point, actually. If we could prove Lord Harrington was guilty, the letters became evidence instead of slander. How do we prove it? Sarah asked. She'd followed me to Margaret's farm. The grain stores, Thomas said. If he deliberately contaminated them, there might be evidence, something that shows it wasn't natural mold. Those stores are guarded, I said. We can't just walk in. No, but I can. Eleanor Brooks had arrived. News traveled fast in a small village. I used to work at the manor 20 years ago, remember? I know the layout, I know where things are kept, and I know which guards get drunk and sleep through their shifts. Over the next hour, more people arrived. Anne Harris, looking terrified but determined. Old Mr. Fletcher, surprisingly spry for his age. Even a few people I didn't know well, but who were angry about the famine, about watching their children starve, while the wealthy hoarded food. But we stayed careful. Only people we trusted completely. Only the ones who'd proven themselves during my beggar test or in the month since. We formed a plan. That night, while Captain Brennan was staying at the inn questioning villagers, we'd break into Lord Harrington's grain stores and search for evidence. It was dangerous, possibly stupid, definitely illegal. But what choice did we have? Before I left Margaret's farm, I went home briefly to check on Gran. She was still by the fire, her breathing labored. "Going to do something foolish?" she asked. "Probably." "Good. Better to die trying to fix things than live watching them get worse." She coughed, a wet sound that made my chest hurt. "Robert, listen to me. That village out there, most of them aren't worth saving. But Margaret is. Eleanor is. That widow and her babies are. You save the ones worth saving, understand?" "I understand, Gran. And if I'm gone when you get back, don't you dare feel guilty about it. I've lived a long life, longer than most. I'm ready." "Don't talk like that." "Someone has to. Now go. Do what needs doing." That night, 10 of us gathered near the manor. Eleanor led us through a back entrance she knew about, one near the servants' quarters where the guards rarely patrolled properly. The grain stores were in the basement, in a large stone room that smelled of mold and rot. We brought candles, keeping the light low. "What are we looking for?" Anne whispered. "Anything that proves the contamination was deliberate," Thomas said. We searched for an hour, checking barrels, looking through documents, examining the room itself. Old Mr. Fletcher found it. Behind a stack of empty barrels hidden in the shadows were small bottles, maybe 10 of them, sealed with wax with labels written in Latin. "What is it?" I asked. Mr. Fletcher had been a scholar before age, and poverty had reduced him to barely surviving. He read the labels, his face growing grim. "Ergot," he said. "Fungal spores. If you introduce these to grain stores under the right conditions, they'll cause the grain to spoil and become toxic. This isn't something that occurs naturally in storage. Someone had to deliberately introduce it." "So it was deliberate," Margaret breathed. "He poisoned his own grain stores." "But why, Sarah asked. "Why would he destroy his own supplies?" "Insurance," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "Think about it. If the grain is contaminated, he can't sell it, but he can claim it as a loss, get compensation from the king for the destroyed supplies. Then he sells his remaining good grain at inflated prices because of the shortage he created. He profits twice." It was diabolical. Lord Harrington had deliberately caused the famine, killed his own people through starvation, all to make money. "We need to take these bottles," Margaret said. "Show them to Captain Brennan." "Will he care?" I asked. "He already said maintaining social order matters more than Hiahunta." "Truth. He might care if the king finds out a noble committed fraud against the crown," Thomas said. "That's not just about starving peasants. That's about stealing from the king himself. That's about making the king compensate a lord for deliberately destroyed supplies." We took the bottles, carefully wrapping them and hiding them under our cloaks. We also took some of the documents we found, records showing Lord Harrington's grain purchases and sales, proving how much profit he'd made from the inflated prices. We snuck back out the way we came, but as we emerged into the cold night air, torches flared all around us, guards, at least 15 of them. And standing in front of them, looking satisfied, was Captain Brennan. "Well," he said, "this is convenient, breaking into a noble's property, theft. I have witnesses now to your crimes." We'd been set up. He'd known we'd come here, probably encouraged it by his threats, wanting to catch us in the act. "We found evidence," Margaret said, stepping forward. "Evidence that Lord Harrington deliberately contaminated his grain stores, that he caused this famine for profit." She held up one of the bottles. Brennan took it, examined it, read the label. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise? Concern? Then he dropped the bottle. It shattered on the stones. "I see no evidence," he said. "Just thieves breaking into a manor, probably looking to steal grain for themselves." "No!" Margaret shouted. "You saw it! You know what that was!" "I saw a bottle. Could have been anything. Could have been something you brought with you to plant as false evidence." He smiled coldly. "Guards! Arrest them all!" We tried to run. We tried to fight, but there were too many guards, and we were just villagers. Within minutes, all 10 of us were in chains. They threw us in the village jail, a small stone building that usually held drunks overnight. Now, it held 10 people accused of treason. "What happens now?" Anne asked, her voice shaking. "They'll execute us," Margaret said quietly. "Public hanging, probably, to set an example." Sarah was crying. I held her as best I could with my hands chained. "I'm sorry," I said to everyone. "I'm sorry I got you all into this." "You didn't," Thomas said. "We chose to come. We chose to fight. And now we'll die for it," Mr. Fletcher said. But he didn't sound angry, just resigned. We sat there through the night, waiting for dawn and whatever punishment Brennan had planned. I thought about Gran, alone at home, about how she'd said she was ready to die, but I wasn't ready to lose her, about how she'd never know what happened to me. But something strange happened. Around midnight, we heard shouting outside, lots of voices, angry voices. Then the door burst open, but it wasn't guards. It was villagers, maybe 40 of them. Thomas Miller, the baker, Margaret Evans, the seamstress, Peter Cross, the butcher, people who'd been cruel and selfish, who'd slammed doors in faces, who'd hoarded food while others starved. "What's happening?" I asked, completely confused. Thomas Miller stepped forward, looking ashamed. "We heard what you found, about Lord Harrington poisoning the grain, about him causing the famine on purpose." "How did you hear?" "One of the guards talked, got drunk at the tavern and told everyone. Said Captain Brennan destroyed evidence, said you were all being arrested for exposing the truth. The whole village knows now." Peter Cross moved forward. "We know we've been terrible people. We know we failed every test of decency you put us through, Robert. But this?" He gestured around. "Hanging people for exposing a noble who's murdering his own people? Even we aren't that far gone, oh, gone." "So we're breaking you out," Margaret Evans said. "And then we're going to storm that manor and drag Lord Harrington out ourselves." I stared at them in shock. These selfish, cruel people who'd proven they cared for nothing but themselves were now risking their lives to save us. "Why?" I asked. "Why now? You've spent months hoarding food while children starved. You threw rocks at beggars. You stole from merchants. Why suddenly grow a conscience?" Thomas Miller's face reddened with shame. "Because you were right about us, Robert. When you tested us as a beggar, when you showed us who we really were, we hated you for it. We wanted to believe we were good people, and you proved we weren't." "We've been living with that shame for months," another villager said. "Watching people die while we hoarded food, knowing we failed every test of basic humanity." Peter Cross added, "And maybe it's too late to change. Maybe we're damned already. But if we're going to hell anyway, we might as well do one good thing first. Maybe it won't save our souls, but at least we'll know we tried." Margaret Evans spoke up, her voice shaking. "My grandson died last week, starved to death while I had grain hidden in my basement. I can't take that back, but I can stop the man who caused it from getting away with murder." There were murmurs of agreement. Others had lost children, parents, siblings to the famine. And now they knew it wasn't natural disaster. It was deliberate murder. They broke our chains, armed themselves with whatever they could find, pitchforks, hammers, kitchen knives, farming tools. And then maybe 40 villagers marched on Lord Harrington's manor. It wasn't the dramatic uprising I'd imagined during my beggar experiment. It wasn't heroic. These people weren't transformed into saints. They were still selfish, still flawed, still the same people who'd slammed doors and hoarded food. But they'd reached a limit. There was a line even they wouldn't cross, and protecting a nobleman who'd deliberately murdered dozens of their neighbors crossed that line. Captain Brennan tried to stop us with his guards, but 15 guards against 40 angry villagers armed with farm tools? The guards took one look at the mob and stepped aside. They were local men, too, and some of them had lost family to the famine. We stormed the manor, found Lord Harrington in his study trying to burn documents, found Father Benedict with him, also destroying evidence. Found more bottles of ergot hidden in Lord Harrington's private study, along with ledgers detailing exactly how much money he'd made from the artificial famine. records of payments to Father Benedict to keep the church quiet, correspondence with grain merchants arranging inflated prices. The evidence was overwhelming. Brennan had no choice. The evidence was there. The entire village had witnessed it, and 40 angry people weren't going to be placated with smooth words. If he tried to protect Lord Harrington now, he'd have a riot on his hands. Lord Harrington and Father Benedict were arrested. Brennan sent for more agents from the capital. The real investigation began. Within a week, the full scope of their crimes was exposed. They'd been running the scheme for years, not just this winter. Hundreds of people had died so they could profit. The king himself was furious. Not about the dead peasants, but about being defrauded out of compensation payments. They both hanged. Public execution in the village square. The entire village watched. I stood there with Sarah watching justice finally done. But it felt hollow. The people who'd died were still dead. The children who'd starved were still gone. My grandmother. I'd gotten home that night after the raid to find Gran had passed away in her sleep. Peacefully, at least. But I'd been so focused on saving everyone else that I hadn't been there for her at the end. The relief grain arrived early, rushed through once the king learned what had happened. Food prices dropped. People stopped starving. And my village? It changed. Not overnight, not completely. People were still selfish sometimes, still cruel sometimes. Thomas Miller still charged too much for bread when he could get away with it. Margaret Evans still looked at strangers with suspicion. Peter Cross still had a mean streak. But something had shifted. They'd seen what happened when evil went unchallenged. They'd seen that sometimes you have to stand up, even when it's dangerous. More importantly, they'd learned they could live with being cruel to strangers, but they couldn't live with being complicit in mass murder. It was a low bar, but it was something. Margaret Patterson wasn't charged with treason. Her letters were ruled justified whistleblowing. She became something of a local hero, though she hated the attention. I just wanted people to stop dying, she told me one day. I didn't want to be celebrated for basic human decency. And me? I learned something important. People aren't all good or all bad. They're complicated, capable of both cruelty and courage, often in the same day. The villagers who'd slammed doors in my face when I was a beggar were the same ones who'd stormed a manor to save me from hanging. The same people. They hadn't become good. They'd just found their limit. And maybe that was the real lesson. Everyone has a line they won't cross. For most people in my village, that line was further away than I'd hoped. They'd let strangers starve, steal from merchants, hoard food while neighbors died. But deliberately murdering dozens of people for profit, protecting the man who did it, that was over the line. It wasn't redemption. It was just the bare minimum of humanity, finally showing up when it was almost too late. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 32 years old, and I learned that sometimes the people you've given up on can surprise you, not by becoming good people, not by suddenly developing compassion or kindness, but by finding one thing, just one thing, they won't tolerate. Sometimes the worst people can make the right choice when it matters most. Not because they've changed, but because they've finally found something that outrages even them. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone surprise you by doing the right thing after months or years of being selfish? Have you ever been that person, choosing courage when it would have been easier to stay silent? Share your stories in the comments, because this channel explores the depths of human nature through compelling narratives. Stories about courage and cowardice, about betrayal and redemption, about the complicated choices people face when tested by circumstances. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories about Margaret's fight for her farm, about my beggar experiment, about the other people in this village and their secrets, then subscribe to this channel right now. We've got dozens of stories already posted, and more coming every week. And if this story made you think, if it challenged you, or moved you, or made you see people differently, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth is, we're all capable of both good and evil. The question is, which one will we choose when the moment comes? And where is the line we absolutely won't cross? Until next time, remember, it's never too late to do the right thing. Even if you've failed every test before, even if you've been the villain of someone else's story, you can still choose courage when it matters most. even if it's just the bare minimum, even if it's just one thing you won't tolerate. Sometimes that's enough to change everything.